Hey everybody, it is Evan Grant of the Dallas Morning News here on Sports Day Insider. And no, you have not made a mistake. Kevin Sherrington is not with us this week. I believe he is somewhere between World Cup and vacation. Covering some soccer matches is a lot for Kevin, so he needs a vacation after that. But the win-win for you guys is you get a half hour or so of baseball talk with my good pal Shawn McFarland and I. We're going to spend the All-Star break with you talking a little bit about the Texas Rangers. Shawn, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for running the show all the way from Philadelphia.
Well, and I should introduce you the way Jacob Latz just spoke about you on a little video thing I did with him when a fan asked about his walk-up music, and he gave you the credit for picking his walkout music, which is Mobb Deep, Shook Ones. Why don't you give us the background on why you how it is that you chose that for Jacob Latz, or how you suggested it to him, and just give us the background.
Sure. Yeah, very funny. So when we were actually, ironically, in Philadelphia on opening weekend, I'm a big collector of vinyl records, and I bought The Infamous by Mobb Deep on vinyl. It's a great album, one of the best hip-hop rap albums of all time. So that happens. I get really into it. I listen to it a lot. Flash forward about a month, and Latz, I believe this was probably his first save, or it was at the very least the first moment where it felt like he was really the closer. This was a home game. I'm struggling to remember it might have been against the Diamondbacks, but it felt like it was the first game that he was really the closer. And we talked to him after the game, and at that point he was walking out to some 90s rap music, and I asked him, are you a big 90s rap fan? He said, yeah. And I said, do you like Mobb Deep? And he said, yes. And that was kind of the end of it. And then the next time he came out, he walked out to Shook Ones Part 2. And in my head, like the self-deprecating person, I was like, I wonder if like that conversation made him think to make that song. And I just thought like, oh, get over yourself. You're not that important. You really think someone would like take your suggestion and make it their walkout song? So I'm glad he did. It's a great song. And I know you've seen it and I saw it this weekend, but the kind of the light show, the walkout show they have for him at Globe Life Field, it looks really cool. And I think it is a really good closer song, and it fits him well.
Well, he's got a light show now. I mean, he's officially a closer. When you get like the lights out treatment and you get the big thing on the board, which is kind of like, it looks kind of like a wanted poster for him for the infamous Jacob Latz. That's how he's being billed. I guess you have made it, and it's a good place to start with a talk about this club this season, because I think Jacob is the singular best story of the season. There are some other good stories. But as we sit here, Shawn, 96 games in, 66 games to go, what is your takeaway from the first, we won't call it the first half. Well, we will call it the first half. I don't care what Brandon Nimmo says. I don't care what anybody else says. It's baseball jargon. What would you say about the pre-All-Star break Texas Rangers? What's your evaluation?
Yeah, I think kind of going off this being Jacob Latz week pretty much, I think he kind of personifies really the reason why this team is where it's at right now. It's taken a lot of guys, whether it's in unexpected roles or guys who've bettered themselves or improved themselves, to put this team in a position where they can go into the break in first place. They've done it mostly without Corey Seager, and a big part of that is because of Ezekiel Duran and Nicky Lopez, guys who were not expected to be carrying this big of a load. They've done it because guys like Jake Berger and Josh Young and Jock Peterson have had bounce-back seasons, and that kind of goes to the idea of guys who, I think used this offseason or took this time to like better themselves for this season, as Jacob Latz did. So I think he personifies really the success they've had this season is the amount of guys who have had to step up in different ways to keep this team afloat with you look at Wyatt Langford and Corey Seager down for as much as they were. That's why this team is even in first place right now.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. I think the one area where I might just pose a counter argument is that every team is going to deal with injuries. And the Rangers have dealt with injuries to Seager and Langford, and they've held their own, and that's good. So I'm not sure that even when this team gets healthy, that you're going to be able to count on guys who are having above career norms like Josh Young and Ezekiel Duran to continue to perform at these above career norms, and Nicky Lopez as well. They've all been absolute studs in the first half, and at some point in time, you think they're gonna cool off a little bit, and you hope at that point in time that Seager and Langford and all those guys pick up the slack. I just feel like there were some opportunities too, in particular, that stick out to me was that long road trip in May when they played the Angels, the Rockies, and the Astros all on the road, and they were all among the worst records in baseball. The Rangers had a losing record on that road trip. And I think this last homestand, they went 5-4 by winning the last two series. But I think this was a homestand. This was an opportunity and a chance for them to really – I think they needed an extra win or maybe even two on this homestand to really, really kind of open up a little bit of a margin. I don't think that they're in a bad position by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that there were a couple of missed opportunities early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I do think about that Colorado Anaheim road trip. I mean, that was especially that weekend in Anaheim. That was some really bad baseball, and to me, that felt like. And then obviously they come back and they get no hit by the Astros a day later. That felt like a legitimate, like, aggressively low point of this season. And I think that's. And I think as you look towards the second half, because everything you said is correct. And I think that they are very, I don't want to say lucky because lucky makes it sound like they didn't do anything to deserve it, but I think they're very lucky to be in first place and to be lucky to be over 500 where, I even asked Skip this after Sunday's game where I said, like, I'm sure there was a lot of ways you maybe envisioned this team being in first place. I can't imagine you envisioned them being in first place given the events that it took to get here, whether it's the missed opportunities or the injuries or Elias Diaz, like being a key contributor to this team, right? Like that was not how this should have been drawn up. So I think you can take all that and look towards the second half and say, thank God we're in first place. Thank God we were able to stay afloat, which is, I think, what they've done more than anything else. Now you don't have the margin of error to be missing these opportunities anymore. As the deadline rolls around, as teams decide whether they're buyers or sellers, that cushion you had to kind of boof a road trip, against bad teams, I don't think that's there anymore.
They did take their margin for error out of it a little bit. But listen, I don't want to harp too much on what's gone wrong because this team is in first place. Yes, the division has been weak. And yes, there have been some missed opportunities, but the Rangers have fought their way to being in first place despite having a negative run differential. And despite being only 24-22 at home, they have fought their way to first place in this division, and so they are the team to chase. With that in mind, Sean, I mean, I think that we are 2.5 weeks from the trade deadline, the July 31st trade deadline, which is moved to Monday, August 3rd this year, 3 extra days. The Rangers have 7 games against Houston and Seattle in that in that stretch leading up to the deadline. What, Shawn, do you think the Rangers will do come the deadline?
I think it's really, really fascinating for a few reasons. Like, one, if you are a first place team, even if you do not feel like a first place team or you're not playing like a traditional first place team, I don't know how, like, you have to buy if you're a first place team, right? Even if it is like a quote unquote ugly first place. The thing that interests me, and I think it was the same as last season too, it all comes back to what capital do they have to move to make a meaningful trade. We've talked a lot about where the farm system is, that it's kind of lacking on that second tier prospects, I think, where you have your Walcotts and maybe your Scarborough. And then there's kind of a gap, between the next tiered prospects. So I think as you go into the deadline, and if they're in first place, if they're above 500, I think it's a team that has to buy. It all just comes back to I don't know how much of a meaningful addition can they make given what they have to trade or what they're willing to trade without completely eviscerating what depth you do have in the farm system. And I think it's a really interesting line to walk. And I'm curious just what you think about that, assuming this team goes into the deadline in a somewhat similar spot to they're in now.
Yeah, I think that those are all legitimate questions, but I do think that they will try and add to this team, and I think for me, the overwhelming need is the right-handed relief situation in the bullpen. They need somebody ahead of Jacob Latz to really handle some innings. Even Jacob Junis has been very good when he's been healthy, but he does have some troubles recovering, and so he's not a great candidate to go on back-to-back days. I think we've seen in the last couple of days, Peyton Gray has struggled a little bit. He's been great as a rookie, but he's also pitching more than he's ever pitched before, and I do think some of that kind of takes a toll. And then the rest of the bullpen, literally, with the exception of lefty Tyler Alexander, is rookies right now. And so the Rangers, I think, need an established right-hander to really help on that front. And I feel like a week ago I would have said that my guy would be Garrett Whitlock, who kind of fits the profile for what the Rangers need as a right-handed setup guy, and fits them financially in that he's basically a rental. There is a club option for 27 and a club option for 28, and you'd have to buy him out of those if you wanted to, which would, I think, cost you an extra $1.5 million. But there will only be about $2.5 million left on his deal for the remainder of this year come the deadline. The catch in all this is that the Boston Red Sox, for whom Garrett Whitlock plays, have been red hot of late. And all of a sudden, you look at the standings at the break, and the Red Sox are very much in the hunt if they choose to stay pat or add for a wild card spot. They're a half game back of Seattle for that last wild card spot, having won 9 straight going into the break. So I don't know if Boston is going to deal at the deadline. The other guy that to me would be of some interest, and now it gets into, again, this is where you can potentially make up for the lack of real quality collateral in terms of trade inventory, is take on salaries that have some money remaining. Luke Weaver has, I believe he's got $11 million for 2027. And he's got about $3 million for the remainder of 26. And so he would be somebody who's attractive. I think he also would be a guy, my guess is, I don't know much about this relationship, but Luke is from DeLand, Florida, the same place as Jacob deGrom. He's a little bit younger, about 5 years, but I think they've probably crossed paths a little bit. And the Mets are a team that definitely will be a seller at the deadline and might want to unload some money because that's going to every dollar that they shed right now is going to lessen their tax burden for an awful team. So those are guys that I really feel like the Rangers need to go out and target, are somebody with some veteran experience to pitch in front of Latz in the later innings.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, it just felt like it didn't feel like it was a matter of fact. Like the bullpen was just on fumes this weekend too. Like you're seeing guys again. Peyton Gray has been great this year. Gavin Collier's had good moments. Like Ben Peoples, for what he is, has like he's been interesting in the week they've had him, right? But like you're just seeing guys being put into positions where they should not be pitching.
And that's not sustainable. As good as these guys have been, these are not guys with off the charts stuff, and they are rookies. And so the idea that they would be able to carry you to the playoffs as the bulk of your bullpen, I think would be a little bit misplaced.
Yeah, I mean, it was barely sustainable like the last week. It took 3 come from behind wins after the bullpen blew leads just to get into the break feeling halfway decent about themselves. So yeah, it's not great. Especially if Junis, again, he's going to throw in Arizona over the All-Star break. Maybe he comes back, maybe he's helpful, but it's pretty clear Chris Martin is not a viable option to pitch meaningful innings anymore. And you gotta, there's nothing more disheartening than blowing leads late. So, yeah.
And again, listen, Chris Martin has been dreadful all year. If you do acquire somebody and you give Martin the ability to rest longer and maybe get healthy, if that's an issue, and he can give you 4 weeks of good baseball in September or October, that's the reason the Rangers don't DFA him at this point in time. I know that there are some fans calling for him to be DFA'd, but this is a guy who has a long track record of being successful in late innings. And if there's any chance, it doesn't cost you anything right now to keep him on the IL and see if he can get healthy. And now you're going to be talking about short stints. You're going to be talking about 4 weeks. You're not talking about a full season. So that's certainly something that I'm not counting on, but it's there as a potential option. I think the other thing the Rangers are going to look to do is maybe move a starter to the bullpen as a reinforcement in some form or fashion. All of that depends on DeGrom being healthy and the veterans being healthy, but it also depends on Jordan Montgomery finishing off his rehab assignment. And so Cody Bradford could be a relief option as opposed to a starting rotation option. And my point here is if you do get Montgomery back, you do have DeGrom healthy, maybe you do have the opportunity to potentially move Jack Leiter or Kumar Rocker into a relief role. And maybe you have the chance to move Cody Bradford into a multi-inning relief role in the middle of the bullpen. And that would give you some more reinforcements. All of that is interesting, but we'll see how that all shakes out, and it all depends on health. The next question for you, Shawn, is the Rangers have 66 games remaining. How many of those, what's the over-under on Corey Seager games?
Oh, I think over-under 33. We'll just go right down the middle. I mean, that's probably what I would take. Again, it's been the story of the last week, right? Is like this weird, I shouldn't say weird, but it's how much he can do right now is predicated on how he feels in a given day. And if he doesn't feel good, it kind of restarts the clock. And he's played 6 games since June 1st. If I were betting money, like I wouldn't feel comfortable suggesting he plays more than half of the next 66 games, just based off what we've seen so far. Where do you stand on that?
I think I'm going to go with 44 as the over-under. I don't think he's back until, at the very earliest, the final week before the deadline. maybe he gets back for that Seattle series at home on July 25th. And I do think when he does come back, you're going to have to marshal his playing time a little bit, because now this is a back issue. And it's not just a question of, is this healed? You just can't put more burden on it. And this all leads to the long-term question of, what do you do with Corey Seager? Do you try and move him to another position on the field? Do you consider trading him at this deadline, at the in the offseason? There's, especially if the team's going to carry a lesser payroll going forward than it had when he was signed. The Seager situation this year has done nothing but create. It's created more consternation for the Rangers, because the hope was, if he played well and the team got off to a great start, they'd be in a great position. They've managed to put themselves in first place, but he hasn't played. And when he did play, he hasn't played particularly well. The other thought was, if he played and he played well, and the Rangers didn't win, they could trade him for a bundle to kind of restart their rebuild clock. And now I wonder if there's even a situation. You watched over the weekend as this team kind of came from behind and they did the plucky Ranger thing and all of that. I wonder if there is a scenario where it's non-binary. That would the Rangers consider, and this is just complete conjecture on my part, but would the Rangers get to the last week of July and say, if we can move Seager, we'll move him, but that doesn't mean we're giving up on this season. It doesn't mean we're starting a rebuild. It just means that we're moving on from that, and we're moving into a different style of play. I think that's a really complicated and risky. That would be a really complicated and risky thing to try and pull off, but I don't rule anything out. I do think that this back issue is a significant concern. I think it's frustrated Seager. I think it's frustrated the Rangers. And yeah, the answers we were given last week, that doctors have said he's got to have 7 good days before he can get back on the field and start doing baseball activity. I don't know what good days constitute. Does that mean a little bit of pain? Does it mean no pain? How do you judge that? And if there's nothing that you can do image-wise or testing-wise that gives you a rather empirical answer, it just creates the idea that this is something that's going to have to be managed going forward. But I do think if he gets back on the field, I think he's going to play fairly regularly.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth pointing out too, whether it was the concussion or now the back, or the back before the concussion. This isn't a case of Corey Seager dogging it. He wants to be back out there. He's trying to be back out there. The Rangers want him back out there. This isn't a case of someone who's, there has been the social media commentary about a guy who's soft and doesn't want to play. And I don't think that's the case, but that's what makes it all more frustrating, is he does want to be out there and he can't be out there. And when he was out there, he wasn't performing. It's been a weird, frustrating season, I think, for him, and to your point, as it pertains to the Rangers too. And look, along your lines of the theory of moving him while also choosing to remain competitive this season, do I think Zeke Duran is like the long-term answer at shortstop? I don't know. I probably lean maybe not. But we've seen what he can do when he's given a runway to play every day, right? Is that good enough to help you for a season where you want to compete in a weak AL? Maybe it is. And then you figure out your long-term shortstop situation in the offseason or moving forward. I don't know. As we discuss the concept of trading Seager and wanting to remain competitive, it's worth considering. I just think one of the more interesting things right now, whether it's at the deadline or in the offseason, let's assume, just for the sake of the argument, that Seager plays some games the rest of the season, and let's just say that he does not come back and light the world on fire. What does the value look like?
Yeah, Shawn, I think that's a great point. Is if he comes back and he doesn't play well, what value is he going to have going into the offseason as a 33-year-old guy who may or may not still be a shortstop in the eyes of other teams? It doesn't matter at this point what Seager's view is. It'll matter how other teams view him. And it's a guy who will have $155 million left on his contract. It's a guy who will have 10-5 rights after this year, as this will complete his 5th year with the Rangers and his 10th year in the big leagues, so he could narrow his trade field even further. And it creates other complications to an already complicated environment. So it's something the Rangers definitely are going to have to work through for the short and long term. I just feel like, my gut just tells me that whatever the personality that the Rangers want from this team, it's just not Corey's personality. And I do think that I think we're seeing a change there. So we'll see what happens when he does get back, or at the deadline, or after this offseason. And I will add one other complication to this whole deal. If you want to trade him this offseason, here's a situation. He's going to have 10-5 rights. You're very likely to have a lockout, so you're not going to be able to contact the player or the agent to get him to waive 10-5 rights. And then if you put together a deal, I guess two teams could put together a deal over the course of the offseason, and as soon as the CBA situation gets solved, you could act to get that taken care of. But it's not going to be an easy thing for the Rangers to do if they choose to move on. Shawn, the other thing that kind of got overlooked this week is the draft. You having spent a summer with Baseball America, what's your prospect mind say about the Rangers draft?
To me, when you look at their first 3 picks, Gio Rojas, Connor Camo, and Brody Mamila, I think they bet on high-end talent versus taking lots of shots, right? I think when you look at this farm system as it is, I think it is kind of lacking on high-end talent that has very easily discernible upside. And I think in Gio Rojas, you get this athletic lefty who throws in the mid to upper 90s. Connor Camo, you get a 6'4" lefty shortstop who could hit for power. Sounds pretty familiar to a guy we were just talking about. And Brody Mamila is a 6'9" left-hander who throws 101 miles per hour. And I know there's the injury concerns there, but those are 3 guys that you don't have to squint too hard to see having real upside. And not to say that they don't like the players they drafted rounds 4 through 20. But to me, this just feels like a big swing on guys with incredibly high upside if all pans out. And that feels like a way you can inject some life into the top half of your farm system, as opposed to going with, I don't want to say safer, but going with guys that have, good makeup or some good tools across the draft. You're banking big on really, really projectable guys at the top. And that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, first of all, I want to give myself a lot of props, because on draft day, I got each of their first 3 round picks correct. So props to me.
Pretty good.
But it was clear that when Rojas dropped, that was the way the Rangers were going to go. They did not envision being able to get the best high school pitcher in the draft, and so they moved there. They had interest in Como at the number 1 pick, in kind of a money-saving strategy where he would be a value pick in the first round if things didn't work out the way they worked out. And so to get a guy that you were thinking about in the first round in the second round is a huge, I think, a huge win for them. I mean, the draft is about landing the guys that you target the most. And then their big play for Brody Bumila, who is 6'9" lefty who throws 100 miles an hour. That's tantalizing. Yes, he's going to see Dr. Keith Meister this week in Arlington and probably have Tommy John surgery or a second type of surgery, and there's a huge amount of risk there. And he's also probably going to get close to, if not first round money, which made the Rangers save some dollars elsewhere. But there's big upside there. This was a guy, again, Bumilla went into the last month of the draft as one of the top 25 talents on the scene. And so you got maybe the top two high school age left-handers in the draft, and you've got this shortstop who really impressed people later in the year. So it was a good first three rounds, and I think that the Rangers couldn't have. I don't know how much scripting you do, but I do think that it just kind of all fell into place for the Rangers. Now, ultimately, time will be the judge of that, right? If Bumilla never gets healthy, trying to think of the kid that they took from Duke in the third round a few years ago, right-hander from New Jersey. Anyway, he had a number of arm problems, gave him first-round money. And again, this was a kid with incredible talent, but never got healthy. And so these things can go bust for sure. But if you do it 50 times and you only hit on one of them, you've landed probably, a superstar. So that's what you're doing. And also there's something for me about taking the Rangers went really strong on high school picks, particularly with those first three picks. And look, Major League Baseball is looking to change the draft. I don't know if that will ultimately take place, but it would rule high school players ineligible. And so I think if you since by stocking up on some of these high school players here this year, it gives the Rangers maybe a potential wave of younger players that will be started in their farm system. And I also think that if you look at the first day of the draft, I think there were only like 50 high school players chosen, and so I think there's been more and more emphasis on the college players, and I think the Rangers maybe have been able to exploit the idea that high school players weren't as valued, and so they've tried to create a little niche for themselves there to create a competitive advantage. So we'll see how that plays out. After every draft, everybody's always happy, and then 2 or 3 years later, it's a different story. See, last thing before we go. So Rangers are 49-47. They are in first place in the American League West by a game and a half over Seattle and 3 games over Houston. They have the second. Well, they are 2 games back of Chicago for the second best overall record, or the number 2 seed is the way I should put it. The number 2 seed in the American League playoffs, which would, if you get there, it would give you a bye in the first round. So, Shawn, does this team make the postseason?
I hate this question. I hate this question so much. No, I come back to no, and I don't know if my brain is just not still fully wrapped around how weak the AL is, that maybe it doesn't matter what the Rangers have going on in their own backyard. But everything we talked about today, right? Like, who knows what they get out of Corey Seager the remainder of this year? Who knows what this bullpen looks like after the deadline? Maybe you add a really good high leverage arm. You still have a lot of rookies in that bullpen that you will still need to rely on at points. You've gotten so much out of Josh Young and Nicky Lopez and Zeke Duran and all these guys. What happens if Josh Young goes through a 2 or 3 week slump? What happens if Nicky Lopez comes back down to earth? Wyatt Langford is really great when he plays, but we just see him continue to miss time. The rotation, there's so many question marks about the rotation that you're banking on they're putting a lot of stock in, I think, Jordan Montgomery and Cody Bradford, two guys who haven't pitched in 2 years, to impact this team. I just think there are so many variables that need to go right for this team to be a playoff team. But then again, it just doesn't seem like the rest of the American League is in a much better spot, nor is this division. So that's what I come back to. But if I'm just focusing purely on the Rangers, I just have way too many questions and not enough answers right now.
Yeah, I'm gonna say I'm gonna take the other side here, and I'm going to say that they do make the postseason. I do think that you will get something out of Seager, and it has to be better than what you got in the first half. And listen, even if you get 80% of Seager, if you get 80% of his performance for his career numbers in the second half, that's still probably better than what you've gotten from Duran in the first half. And I think that Duran would still have a role at second base, with Nicky Lopez sharing time there in a platoon that seems like it's working out. But I also just go back to this. Who is going to unseat them? I'm not sure that I any longer really feel strongly about Seattle getting hot. I don't think Minnesota, with its very young team, is going to be able to stay in the playoff picture. It's going to be real interesting to see what happens with the Red Sox over these next 2 weeks, because they could either become wholesale sellers or they could continue this incredible surge and go right into the thick of the playoff race. And the Astros, I just don't think have enough pitching. So those are really it. I mean, Baltimore is 5 games below 500. Toronto is 6 games below 500. There just don't seem to be a ton of teams, even in this weak AL, that are really in the playoff mix. And certainly there's a lot that can happen over 66 games. And there are teams that are below 500 that certainly could be in the mix. But here's the difference, right? When you are below 500, you're not going to go out and add a bunch of players. So those teams are just going to have to play markedly better. The Rangers have incentive to go out and add a player or two. And so I think that they get better. And I'm not sure that Jordan Montgomery and Cody Bradford are the answers, but I do think when you factor in both of them, you get an answer somewhere. If you do get a Seager back who performs at his traditional levels or close to them in the second half, you've got a needle mover of a player, and you've increased your versatility on the bench. So that's kind of where I'm at. I think it's impossible, as much as I feel like the Rangers have lost some opportunities early in the year. I think it's impossible not to sit here and say there are a lot of things that could go right in the second half. And I say all of that, and if Jacob deGrom misses significant time or Nathan Eovaldi misses significant time, oh well. I mean, you've got a real issue on your hand. But at this moment, I just feel like, if it's for no other reason than by default, I just feel like the Rangers are going to win a playoff spot, or at least end up in the playoffs. I don't know if you would classify it as winning a spot, but you may end up in the playoffs. So they've got these 7 games before the deadline ahead against Houston, 3 in Houston leading right up to the deadline, and the 4 games against Seattle at home, July 24th through the 27th, I think it is.
Yeah.
That's a huge series. The Rangers really need to go out and win a series against the Mariners, who have absolutely tormented them for the last 5 years. Right after it comes shortly after the break, and it comes on the heels of the Rangers having a pretty challenging first week right out of the gates, coming back from the All-Star break. 3 games at Atlanta, and then 3 games against the Central Division leading White Sox. So the next 2 weeks will tell another tale, and it feels like we've been saying that all year. But that's where I'm at, and I still go back to this. I think they're in the playoffs. Do they go anywhere? I don't know, but I think they end up in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I think if Corey comes back and he's healthy and he's Corey Seager and Wyatt Langford stays healthy and continues to play like an all-star, I don't think anything matters, right? If you get those two guys back and they're doing what they're expected to do, the entire dynamic of this team changes. I think a lot hinges on that. But, and also, look, you mentioned coming out of the break with Atlanta and Chicago. Well, guess what? Like, the good teams haven't been the issue this year. It's the Anaheims of the world that they struggle against. So maybe nothing matters. Maybe we have no idea what's going on here because it's Atlanta won't be the issue, but the August road trip in Anaheim and Sacramento is going to kill them because nothing about this team makes any sense at the moment.
Yeah, nothing really does. But we've spent about 45 minutes talking about this nonsensical team, and it's been a good talk. I appreciate you bearing with me today as I get ready for the All-Star game. But we will be back next week. I'm not sure if Kevin will be here or not. I can't keep up with his vacation schedule and his World Cup schedule. I know the World Cup should be, well, I know that Dallas Stadium will no longer be Dallas Stadium ceases to exist this week. What a glorious run it's been for Dallas Stadium.
Yeah. What's your favorite Dallas? In the long history of Dallas Stadium? What stands out to you as your favorite memory?
Yeah, somebody won a game there.
Yeah.
What was the quarterfinal game there? Was it Belgium and Spain? See, all the memories run together now.
You know, I know Australia and Egypt played there at some point. I know Messi was there a few times. It just there's been so many memories that it's like, how do you pick just one?
I know.
That's what I'm stuck on.
Alas, Dallas Stadium will no longer exist, and the Cowboys will have to find some place to play. But I hear there's plans for a new place called AT&T Stadium. Anyway, this has been great. Shawn, thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week in some form or fashion. I don't know if we'll be talking Rangers or if we'll be talking a look ahead to Cowboys training camp. But from everybody in here to everybody out there, thanks for joining.